I'm Leslie. Standing in my parents' backyard, I watch as the chaos unfolds around me. My mother is wailing, my father is shouting, and my brother is pale and panicked. The once peaceful family gathering has turned into a storm, and I'm the eye of it. But it wasn't always like this. I'm a structural engineer. People often think we're cold, but we're just people who trust in things that hold weight. I've built my life one verified load at a time, taking no shortcuts and relying only on the help I've earned. There was one place, though, where I allowed myself to be soft, a charming clapboard house on Elm Street. It was white with a blue door, and it held more memories than I could count. My grandfather, Henry Thompson, bought that house in 1968. He was a carpenter, a man who loved working with his hands. Over the next 45 years, he transformed it into a perfect home. He taught me how to read a level before I could even read a book. When I graduated from college, he pressed the brass front door key into my palm and said, "A house is a promise you make to yourself." I've kept that key on my key ring ever since. The house on Elm Street was not large. It had 2 bedrooms, a deep porch, and a kitchen that always smelled of sawdust and cinnamon, no matter how much I cleaned it. In my family, I was the one who got this house. My mother, Susan, got the family silver, and my brother, Jake, got all the attention. For a while, I thought the family had finally done something right. Henry passed away at the age of 82. In his sleep, in the bedroom he'd painted countless times to get the color just right. The funeral was small. My mother cried the loudest and left the earliest. A week later, a lawyer named Mr. Miller called me into his office downtown. I was 31 at the time, exhausted from a project and still grieving. He started talking about things like irrevocable trusts, successors, trustees, and beneficiaries. I signed where he pointed, thinking the house was now mine, and that was all I needed to know. He told me to read the folder later, but I just filed it away and went back to work. Work was the one thing that never asked how I was holding up. I was the responsible one in the family. So when my mother offered to keep a spare key for upkeep, saying, "You're hardly ever home, dear," I gave it to her without hesitation. When my father, Robert, said he'd watch the place while I was away, I thanked him. I handed the keys to the people who, as I later found out, resented me the most. The porch swing was Henry's first and last project at the house. He carved the oak wood himself and burned his initials, HT 1968, into the armrest. As a child, I'd sit on his lap as he explained how a beam carried a load and how a person carried promises. The summer before he died, he was slower, but he still made it to the swing every evening. One night, he patted the seat, and we rocked for a while. Out of the blue, he said, "This house will never go to anyone who hasn't earned it. I've made sure of that." I laughed and asked what he meant, but he just looked at the yard as if he could see something I couldn't. "Lawyers can be useful for protecting what's yours," he said. I thought he was being dramatic, but now I realize he was planning for a storm I couldn't even imagine. In April, I got an assignment to work on a cable-stayed bridge retrofit outside Barcelona. It was a 10-week project, the kind that could make my career. I said yes right away. I was good at leaving. It was just another load I knew how to carry. Before I left, I did everything to make everyone else's life easier. I set the bills on autopay, told my parents where the water shut-off was, and left a detailed list on the fridge. My mother walked through the house with me, running her hand along the banister Henry had sanded. "Don't worry about a thing," she said. "We'll take good care of it." I was touched, thinking that maybe losing Henry had softened her. I hugged her at the door and flew across the ocean, proud of myself for being so easy to love. But there were signs. 3 days before I left, my mother asked too casually where Henry's house papers were kept. I told her Mr. Miller had the originals and I had copies in the drawer. She nodded like it didn't matter, but I should have known better. Then Jake, who rarely called me, phoned. He wanted to talk about the family's finances, which in our family always meant someone wanted money. I told him I was swamped, and we'd talk when I got back. He went quiet, and I should have been worried. When I landed in Spain, Jake's social media was full of pictures of a luxury resort in the Seychelles. He'd been unemployed for 6 months, and I remember frowning at my phone, wondering where he was getting the money. But then work took over, and I forgot about it. There was also a text from an unknown number, forwarded by my mother, asking if I'd considered listing the Elm Street property. I replied with a simple no, and my mother sent a thumbs up and a heart. I thought the matter was closed, but I had no idea that the house had already been sold. Barcelona consumed me. The project was intense, and I was happy in my own way, useful, exhausted, and far from the family drama. I called home on Sundays, but the calls got shorter. My mother was always busy with community events, my father was around, and Jake never came to the phone. I blamed it on the time difference. One night, jet lagged and wide awake, I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, turning the brass key over in my hands. I thought about the last time I'd stood on the porch, locking the blue door and testing the knob twice, just like Henry had taught me. I had a simple plan to restine the railing when I got back. Little did I know that while I was sleeping in a different time zone, my family was sitting at a kitchen table with a real estate agent, signing papers to sell my house. In the 6th week of the project, a call shook me. I phoned home on a Tuesday because a permit delay had freed up my evening. My mother picked up on the 9th ring, out of breath with voices in the background. "Now's not a good time, honey," she said. When I asked who was over, she said it was just some people about the yard and they were handling it. That phrase always meant a decision I wasn't part of. I asked if everything was okay with the house, and there was a long pause. "Everything is wonderful," she said, too brightly. "You focus on your bridge." Then she hung up. I had that old engineer's feeling, the one that tells you when something doesn't add up. I texted Jake and my father, but got no response. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd sort it out when I got home. But 2 days later, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, a retired librarian who'd watched me grow up, sent me a photo with the words, "Is this real?" The photo was of my front lawn, and there was a real estate sign with a bright red "Sold" rider. I felt a cold chill run through me. I typed back, saying I was in Spain and hadn't listed the house. Mrs. Jenkins replied that a moving truck had been there on Saturday, and my mother had been directing it. I sat there in shock. I knew a house couldn't be sold by people who didn't own it. I called my mother, hoping for an explanation. She answered eagerly, asking about Barcelona as if nothing was wrong. I asked calmly, "Why is there a sold sign on Elm Street?" She laughed nervously and said it had all happened so fast, that the market was perfect and the family needed the money. When I asked who had signed the sale, she deflected, saying not to worry about the details. In the background, I could hear Jake saying something about a villa with 2 pools. My mother then said what she'd been thinking all along. "It should have been mine anyway. I'm just taking back what's rightfully mine." I didn't argue. I just said, "Okay, Mom. Enjoy the trip," and hung up. Then I opened the county recorder's website. There it was, a warranty deed transferring the Elm Street property to a couple named the Johnsons. The grantor was my name, but I knew I'd never signed it. It was a forgery. I couldn't get on a plane. I had a contract and the bridge had a load test that only I could sign off on. So I stayed in Spain and started building a case. I pulled up the county recorder's public portal at 2 a.m. and searched for the parcel number. The deed showed that the sale had taken place 5 weeks earlier. I read it over and over, not believing what I was seeing. I looked at the notary block. The stamp belonged to my cousin Lily. She was 38, always on the verge of financial ruin, and had gotten her notary commission a year ago. She had sworn that she'd witnessed me signing the deed, but I was 8,000 miles away at the time. I requested a certified copy of the deed. When it arrived at my hotel 8 days later, I waited until the evening to open it. There, in black and white, was my forged signature. I compared it to my real signatures on 15 different drawings. It was clear that it was a forgery. I also laid out my passport, which showed I'd entered Spain in April and hadn't left, and my work site badge log, which proved I was on the bridge in Spain on the day of the supposed signing. I called Mr. Miller the next morning. He remembered me right away, saying, "Henry's granddaughter, the engineer. He talked about you all the time." I told him everything, the sold sign, the forged deed, my passport, and Lily's notary stamp. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember what you signed in my office after Henry's funeral? The house isn't yours in the traditional sense. Henry put it in an irrevocable trust 2 years before he died. You're the beneficiary and the successor trustee." He explained that my parents had sold something they didn't own. The deed with the forged signature was void from the start. The Johnsons, a young couple who'd scraped together their savings for their first home, likely never legally owned the house. Mr. Miller also told me about the trust's protective clause. Henry had instructed him to write a forfeit provision into the estate plan. Any beneficiary who tried to take trust property by fraud would forfeit their entire inheritance. By forging the deed, my mother and Jake had likely triggered this clause. I decided to file a case. I landed back in the U.S. 10 days later. I drove straight to Elm Street. The sold sign was still there, weathered and faded. The Johnsons were in the process of renovating the house. I knocked on the door and introduced myself. I showed them the certified deed and explained gently that the people who'd sold them the house had no right to do so and that a notice would soon be on the title. The husband said they had title insurance. I told him it would protect them and that it wasn't their fault. I left them Mr. Miller's number. That same day, Mr. Miller filed a lease pendens, a public notice that the title of the Elm Street house was disputed. This froze the property. It couldn't be resold or refinanced. My mother found out and started calling me. Her calls went from confusion to anger to fake grief. I let them go to voicemail, saving them so Mr. Miller could hear the timeline of her lies. Mr. Miller brought in a forensic document examiner. She compared the deed signature to my real ones and concluded that it was a forgery. She also found that Lily's notary journal was missing the entry for the day of the supposed signing. There was also a forged power of attorney that my father had used. My mother's strategy was to make me the villain. She sent waves of texts saying I was tearing the family apart, that I was selfish and ungrateful. Jake called to panic, saying I was going to put our parents in jail over a house. My father left a threatening message, saying I wasn't his daughter anymore if I continued with the case. But I knew they'd already cut themselves off when they sold my house. Before the family meeting on Sunday, 2 things happened that sealed the deal. Mr. Miller confirmed the protective clause. By orchestrating the fraudulent transfer, my mother and Jake had forfeited their inheritances, which were close to $35,000 each. The money would go to a charitable cause Henry had named years ago. Also, the county's real estate fraud unit took the case. A detective named Officer Davis called me and said it was one of the cleanest forgery cases she'd seen. On Sunday, I drove to my parents' backyard. It was a beautiful afternoon, but the atmosphere was tense. My father was at the grill, my mother had set out lemonade and cookies, and the extended family was there to witness. I'd invited the Johnsons, and they stood nervously near the gate. My father smirked and said, "Glad you came to your senses." My mother started her speech, saying it was a family decision and that I didn't understand the situation. My father repeated his favorite line, "The house paid for the trip. You've done fine without it." Jake added that it was just a house. I opened my folder and laid out the documents one by one. I showed them the deed, my real signatures, my passport, and the missing notary log. I explained that the deed was forged, the notarization was false, and they had no right to sell the house. I said calmly, "The house was in Grandpa's trust and I'm the trustee. You sold something that was never yours." My mother's composure broke. She shouted, "How can you be so calm? We're your family." I replied, "Because the house you sold was never yours to sell." I then told them the rest. The forged deed was void. The Johnsons would be made whole by their title insurance. The money from the sale was being traced, and they had triggered the forfeit clause. The backyard erupted. My mother started crying and blaming everyone but herself. My father stood up, shouting that I was a traitor. Jake was panicking about the money he'd spent. Lily came up to me and whispered, "I just needed the money. Your mom said it was okay." I told her I was sorry she'd been used, but there was no absolution. I gathered my documents, walked over to the Johnsons, and told them they'd be okay. Then I walked over to the sold sign, pulled it out of the ground, and laid it in the dumpster. I took the brass key out of my pocket, closed my fist around it, and said to my family, "I'll see you in court if you want, otherwise, I'll see myself home." The legal process took about 2 years. The judge canceled the forged deed and confirmed the Elm Street house as property of Henry's trust, with me as the trustee. The Johnsons were made whole, and my family had to pay back the money. My mother and Jake lost their inheritances, and the money went to the charitable cause Henry had planned. My parents took an early plea to felony forgery and were sentenced to probation and restitution. Lily lost her notary commission. I moved back into the house on Elm Street that fall. I rebuilt the kitchen with Henry's hand, tools, and the help of a contractor. I sanded the porch swing down to clean oak and left the HT 1968 exactly where it was. The brass key now hangs on a hook by the blue door, a constant reminder of the promise I made to myself and the legacy Henry left me. That's my story. One forged signature, one grandfather who saw it coming, and a folder full of documents that said everything I never had to shout. If this story reminds you to read the documents with your name on them, do it. And if someone you love is the dependable one who's always taken for granted, share this story with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.